Is there any cushion, I think, of this rotation cushion in there? Do you have any small cushion, like some rotation cushion in there? Yeah. Good lunch, everyone. Good nice lunch. Yeah, everybody happy? Yeah, okay. Are you going to fall asleep now, or are you going to be okay? There's always a danger of having lunch, right? That's it, yeah, great. Thank you. Two. Okay. Yeah. Before I start on the next paragraph in the next section of the right speech, before I start on that, I just wanted to, maybe first of all, did you find that the video meditation every half an hour is a good thing? Is it useful? Yeah, I found it very useful myself, so okay, good. Yeah, so we're on the same page, that's good. Okay, the first thing I want to point out is just that I want to show the connection between this particular sutta and the Noble Eightfold Path. And the reason I want to show that is because one thing you find when you start reading the suttas, that all the different suttas, all the different descriptions of the path, all the kind of the different ways of talking about the Dhamma, they all kind of work together, and they all function together. It's like a big jigsaw puzzle, all these parts kind of stick together one way or another. So the Dhamma is kind of a whole, this united thing. And because it is a whole, because it is a united thing, that's why it's enough to have like one moment of insight, right? What moment of insight? Once you become awakened, you see the whole thing, everything goes together. And this, because this is about the training of the mind, because this is about the path to awakening, this can then be mapped onto the Noble Eightfold Path. I just want to show you very briefly how this works, so you get some idea of how the structure actually functions here. So at the beginning we're talking about the Buddha arising in the world, right? So the arising of the Buddha is like right view coming into existence. Suddenly right view is possible. Then the Buddha teaches his teaching to someone else, and they get confidence in that teaching. That is right view arising in that person. So the first factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is when the Buddha teaches someone, and they get confidence in the teaching. That is right view. It's the beginning of the path. Then, once they have that right view, they start thinking, maybe I should ordain. Maybe I should start practicing, taking this teaching seriously, right? And that is kind of the right intention arising here. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you ordain. Sometimes you have too many obligations in the household life, so you practice the path as a householder. But it's an intention to take the teaching seriously one way or another. That is right intention. The second factor of the Noble Eightfold Path. The main way that it comes out here is in the idea of ordination. Then, once you are ordained, once you take the teaching seriously, the next thing you do is that you start practicing. And the first thing we saw before is right action, right? You act in the right way. So you can see here how this whole gradual training, and you can see this as we go along, that all the factors of the Noble Eightfold Path, even beyond the Noble Eightfold Path, are actually included in this. And as you start to see the sutta, you start to understand how they work, you see this kind of patterns, and things actually overlap. One teaching can be found somewhere else, and it overlaps with another teaching. You find this systematically throughout the suttas of the Buddha, and you see it here as well. So, because the fourth factor of the Noble Eightfold Path is right speech, that's what you also can expect to find here. And of course, indeed, that's exactly what we do find there. We now find an explanation of right speech. So let's have a look at this. What he has to say here about speaking. And this is I always find this very nice, this passage of speaking rightly. And you probably have heard it before. Nevertheless, it's always nice to repeat these teachings because they are so fundamental to the practice of the Buddhist path. It's always good to keep these things in mind. So, this is what the Buddha says. Abandoning false speech, he abstains from false speech. He speaks the truth, adheres to truth, is trustworthy and reliable, one who is no deceiver of the world. Abandoning malicious speech, he abstains from malicious speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here in order to divide the two parties from each other. Nor does he repeat to these parties what he has heard elsewhere in order to divide these people from those. Thus he is one who reunites those who are divided, a promoter of friendships, who enjoys concord, rejoices in concord, delights in concord, a speaker of words that promote concord. Abandoning harsh speech, he abstains from harsh speech. He speaks such words that are gentle, pleasing to the ear, and lovable, as go to the heart and are courteous, desired by the many, and agreeable to many. Abandoning gossip, he abstains from gossip. He speaks at the right time what is fact, speaks what is good, speaks on the Dhamma and discipline, it says here. At the right time, he speaks such words as are worthy recording, reasonable, moderate, and beneficial. Okay, so that is right speech. And the first one here is not to lie, right? And it says here the definition of lying here is quite handy to keep in mind. He is no deceiver of the world, right? So lying basically is all about deception. You're trying to get somebody to believe in something that isn't true. You're trying to deceive somebody. That's what lying is all about. And it's good to keep that in mind, that lying is about deception. It's a kind of fundamental aspect. So if you want to do the opposite of lying, if you want to be someone who is, not only doesn't do the bad, but does the good, you want to be someone who leads the world in the right way. Someone who's not just doesn't lie, but someone who actually speaks the truth, who is not trying to deceive anyone, you're not trying to kind of, lead anyone up the garden path and pretend that something is the way it isn't. So this is basically the positive side. We are honest and straightforward about things. This doesn't mean, of course, that you have to be blunt and harsh with people. Sometimes, we think, we've got to tell the truth. And we tell the truth in such a way that it is hurtful. That also is not useful, right? It doesn't mean that you should be kind of harsh with your speech. What it means is that you know, sometimes you just have to remain quiet, not say anything. Sometimes, if the situation is difficult, maybe you leave the talk a little bit aside because it isn't the right time to tell the truth or whatever. So you have to be skillful with this. And it doesn't mean being blunt and being stupid about things. So this is the first thing. The second thing to always remember about all aspects of morality is that morality, in the end, is always about intention, right? Where you come from? Why are you doing things? If you're not going to kill anyone, if you're going to tell the truth, why? What is actually driving you to do something which is wrong? And the driving force, that is what tells you whether something is moral or immoral. So, the 5 precepts, there's the guideline, right? But let's say that, a situation, a very, very difficult situation. Sometimes you can imagine some scenarios that are really, really difficult. Someone is running after someone else and wants to kill them, and then they ask you, where did that person go? That way or that way? And if you tell the truth, they will die, right? So what should you do in that case? These things never happen in reality, so they're a bit fanciful, but Sometimes it's nice to take these kind of examples that aren't fanciful, just to get clarity about what's going on there. So what will you do? And of course the point is that if you are lying based on compassion, because you don't want that person to die, if you base your speech on compassion, you can't go too far wrong, right? That's basically what it comes down to. But if you lie because you're greedy, if you lie because you're angry, if you lie because you're deluded, that's when it really is bad karma, because you are trying to take advantage of somebody for your own selfish reasons. And if you lie because of compassion or kindness, then at the very worst, it's kind of grey karma. It's not really, it doesn't lead to a bad destination. It kind of leads back to the human realm, perhaps. It's greyish, but it's not really so bad. So these things are important to keep in mind. Very often we have this black and white view of karma. It's either good or bad. The reality is the world isn't like that. Things are either good or bad. There's all these grey areas in between. So please keep that in mind. So know your intention. That's even more important. And you may ask, well, why do we even have this rule? What's the point of having the 5 precepts if everything is about intention? The reason you have the 5 precepts is because sometimes intentions are hard to understand. Sometimes our mind is clouded. Sometimes we can't see things clearly. And then it's very useful to have very clear guidelines, right? You feel really confused. You don't know what difference between up and down, or left and right. The mind is completely clouded. Then if all you can remember, okay, 5 precepts, then you stick to those. But if you have great clarity of mind, you feel relaxed, you feel at ease, and you can actually look more into your heart and ask yourself, what is actually driving me? Here is this poor person having a really hard time. They can't take the truth right now, right? If you know that in the heart, if you tell them the truth, it's going to hurt them really, really badly. Okay, so you say, oh, don't worry about it, you talk about it later. You kind of slightly deceive it, because maybe they should worry about it, maybe there's a problem there. But you're doing it because of compassion, because you understand that this is not the right time. So that is, again, it may not be 100% pure speech, but it's very close to pure. And the more you're coming from compassion and wisdom, the more pure that speech actually is. So this is, in the end, that is the ultimate way of deciding whether something is moral or immoral. One of the great discussions that have been going on in Australia, and it goes along around the world in recent years, I think the idea of euthanasia. You know what euthanasia is? Yeah. It's kind of somebody's dying, or not dying, somebody is very, very ill and they want to die. Then is it okay to help them to die if they want to die, right? And again, it's the same thing. Well, where are you coming from? If you want to help them to die, what is driving you? Are you coming from compassion because you really want to help them end the suffering they're in? Or are you thinking, hey, my inheritance? Right? If you're thinking, hey, my inheritance, okay, then you better not do it. Then it's bad, right? But if you think, I don't care about my inheritance, actually, maybe not even a family member, I just want to be kind. I want to help them end their suffering. I have tested in so many ways, I'm absolutely sure that they really want to die. Okay. In that case, it's not going to be very bad karma, right? So these are the kind of situations that we have to think about. And this is throughout this idea of morality. Where you're coming from is actually what matters the most. Okay, so let's move on to the other aspects of right speech. So he abandons malicious speech, right? He abandons this like divisive speech. He does not repeat elsewhere what he has heard here to divide those people from each other. And then comes the opposite part, so you don't divide people by using divisive speech. On the contrary, what you do is you promote friendships, right? You enjoy concord, you enjoy harmony, you rejoice in harmony, you delight in harmony. You speak words that promote harmony. Isn't that a very beautiful way of thinking about right speech? You promote friendships, right? Instead of saying negative things about one person to someone else. And it's so easy to talk negatively about other people. It's so hard sometimes, this is just human realm. Almost everyone talks negatively about somebody sometimes. So instead of doing that, if you talk negatively about one person to someone else, they tend to get divided from each other, right? That's what happens, it's the nature of things. So because then they get the same impression that you have, they get divided. Instead, we try to promote understanding. Why, try to understand why this person is this way. We try to come from a perspective whereby the two people previously may have been in disharmony. Suddenly, they can find understanding and friendship instead. It's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Bring people together. And it's interesting that this is the thing which comes after lying. One of the principles of the Dhamma, which I think you should always keep in mind, is also very useful when you read the suttas. Remember that nothing is arbitrary in the suttas. It's not as if, when you have 4 ways of wrong speech, it's not arbitrary, the sequence. Sequences in Buddhism always have a reason, always have a purpose. And the purpose of a sequence is usually that you start with the most severe and you go to something which is less and less bad. That's certainly in this particular case. So the worst one is lying. The second worst one is malicious speech, which divides people apart. And the third one is harsh speech. And the last one is like not really gossip, it's actually the wrong word, like idle chatter is a much better way of translating that word. Sappapalapa in Pali. So divisive speech actually is quite bad when we divide people from each other. So if we do the opposite instead, bring people together, bring unity, that is actually quite a powerful way of moving forward on a spiritual path. So the next one then is harsh speech. You abandon harsh speech. You refrain from harsh speech. You speak words that are gentle, pleasing to the ear, lovable, as go to the heart, are courteous, desired by the many, and agreeable to the many. So, there you are. Not always easy, right? Gentle words. Words that go to the heart, right? It's like somebody who's, what it's like when you meet someone who speaks very nicely, it goes to your heart, right? It feels very good when people speak like that to you. So this is kind of the way we're trying to speak. Very, very nice. Opposite of harsh speech. Okay, the last one. You abandon idle chatter. You abstain from idle chatter. You speak at the right time. What is fact? What is good? What is Dhamma? What is this discipline, it says here? Such words that are worthy of recording, right? Worthy of recording, That's quite nice. It's like when you read a sutta by the Buddha, you read Dhammapada, you find a nice verse, and it's so beautiful, you want to remember it, you don't want to lose it again, right? You think, wow, I've got to remember this. It's a beautiful saying. Those are the words that are worthy of recording. How often do we hear words that are worthy of recording in the world? It's not that often, right? Often we hear words that are not really worthy of recording. But sometimes, especially when it comes to the Dhamma, when it comes to the spiritual path, sometimes we hear that. And you think, wow, that makes so much sense. I got to remember that. I know in my life very often I come across things, or I hear a teacher, I hear Ajahn Brahm say something, because I hear talks about Ajahn Brahm every week in the monastery. Wow, that is really good. I've got to remember that. And what a wonderful thing that is when we speak words that are worthy of recording. And often there is an inverse relationship between words that are worthy of recording and the amount of words that we speak, right? If we speak a lot, it often means that a lot of the things we say are not really worthy of recording. Because you can't say that much stuff that's worthy of recording. There isn't, you can't say wise words absolutely, continuously, 24 hours a day. That's impossible. Wisdom is like something, it's like the right time, right? The opportunity arises for saying something which is wise. The opportunity isn't always there, and a lot of the time we aren't just able to tune into the situation well enough to be able to say something wise anyway. So wisdom often means not speaking too much. And then when the time is right, you can feel that you actually have a perspective on the situation which is nice to share. Sometimes you can feel that. Then you know that you're speaking words worthy of recording. So, it's a nice way of thinking about speaking words that are worthy of recording for yourself. They are reasonable, though. What is the Pali word for this? I can't remember that. I'll have a quick look if you don't mind. I have a Kindle with me. It's very nice, which means I have portable Pali Kindle. So, really sure what that means, so I'm just going to leave that out. And they are moderate, and the Pali word for this means that they have an end. They are words that are kind of, you are quite succinct in the way you speak. You don't kind of go on forever. There is a limit to your words, right? It just doesn't go on and on. And they are beneficial, is the last one here. They are connected with what is beneficial, connected with what is good, is actually the Pali here. So this is how we speak. Speak on Dhamma, speak on the discipline. The word behind discipline here is the word Vinaya, and in the Suttas you often have the two words Dhamma and Vinaya go together. And very often when we think of the word Vinaya, we think that the word Vinaya refers to the kind of the whole section in the Pali Canon known as the monastic Vinaya. Right? There's 5 volumes called the Vinaya in the Pali, and we often think that this is what it actually refers to, the word Vinaya. But it's interesting, when you look at the word Vinaya, the way it actually works in the suttas, the verbal form of that is vineti, which quite literally means to train. That's what the word Vinaya means in the sutta. It means to train. So I think that the original meaning of the word Vinaya, before the Vinaya existed as a canon in its own right, actually means training. So when you see the words Dhamma Vinaya together, it doesn't actually mean doctrine and discipline, or Dhamma and discipline. What it actually seems to mean is doctrine and practice. It means like theory and practice, basically. The Dhamma is a doctrine, it's a theory the Buddha lays down, and then how you apply that theory in your life, that is the actual training. And that, I think, is the, as far as I can see, is perhaps the original way, the actual meaning of Vinaya in the suttas. So Dhamma and discipline, to me, sounds a bit harsh. Dhamma and training, on the other hand, sounds much more, to me, it sounds much more useful. So the Dhamma and training is what we talked about. Okay, so there you are. So that is the factors of right speech for you. Equivalent roughly to the right speech in the Noble Eightfold Path. Okay, so let us have another short break and do a little bit of meditation together. speech that we just been going through. And the next step, of course, on the Buddhist training is the training of the mind itself. This comes up next. Before I move on to that, I just think it's important, perhaps just to remind people how important these things actually are. And these are the basic steps, right, on the spiritual path, the training in actions, in body, in action, in speech. Very important and very necessary to actually get a proper foundation for meditation to become possible. Without a strong foundation in this kind of virtue, in this kind of building of one's character, it's going to be absolutely impossible to have success in meditation practice. These things are so important. And the Buddha says elsewhere that it's only when meditation is based on virtue, based on sila, that it has great fruit and great benefit. So this really is a foundation stone. So please make sure that you work with these things. Too often I think people try to meditate without any proper foundation in sila, in virtue, and they're having a very hard time, find it very difficult. And it's natural, right? It's not going to work if you don't do the groundwork, the basics. When you do the basics, then it becomes possible to do the meditation practice. So look at these issues and see if perhaps there's something you can do to improve yourself in these areas if your meditation isn't very bright. Now the other thing about, which is often the reason why meditation is hard for people, is because their mind isn't pure enough. Right? It's fine that you have your speech and your bodily actions are relatively pure, but even if your mind isn't very pure, it's going to be hard to do meditation practice. So you have to get into the idea of developing your mind and changing the way your mind functions to reduce the defilements of the mind. When you reduce the defilements of the mind, that is when meditation really starts to become possible, and you can actually do, and the meditation becomes naturally peaceful. These are very important principles, and it's not so hard to understand why that is the case. As long as you have desire, or you have some kind of ill will in your mind, just remember what these things are. What is desire? Right? Desire is basically looking to the future. There's something you desire and you haven't got. There's something you want. It's the mind basically going off into the future. It's possible to have desire without having some tendency of the mind to go off into the future. If you go off into the future, you don't have any mindfulness of the present moment, right? Mindfulness of the present moment is like a basis for being able to do meditation practice. If you're angry about something, upset about something, often it's about something in the past that happened, something not happy with someone about it, you're upset with somebody, whatever it is. So ill will or anger has a tendency to drag you into the past. Again, it's taking you away from the present moment, which is necessary to be if your meditation is going to take off. So you can see here, it's quite obvious why psychologically defilements are going to be counterproductive for meditation practice. And that is why the more you can let go of these defilements, the less defilements you have, the more powerful your meditation is going to be. This is why in Buddhism we talked about virtue. One important aspect of the virtue is precisely the virtue of the mind, the mental morality is a very important part. This is what comes up next here. And of course the added benefit of mental virtue is that if you have mental morality, mental virtue, it means that the virtue of speech and body tend to follow along almost as a consequence of that. Because a beautiful mind will almost always tend to also give rise to beautiful actions and beautiful speech. Everything becomes quite easy, right? Don't have to force yourself to be virtuous. It comes by itself. Isn't that nice? You just want to be virtuous. You don't have to actually try so hard. This is the great benefit of this kind of practice. So let's see what the Buddha has to say about mental virtue and how this is practiced. So the first part here is about contentment, and this is how the Buddha describes this. So he becomes content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out, taking only these with him. Just as a bird, wherever it flies with its wings as its only burden, So too, the bhikkhu becomes content with robes to protect his body and with alms food to maintain his stomach. And wherever he goes, he sets out, taking only these with him. Possessing this aggregate of noble virtue, he experiences in himself a bliss that is blameless. So, this is where we are moving towards the idea. This is already working on the mind, basically, because it's about contentment. And contentment is basically a mental thing, right? You're happy, don't have too many desires, don't have too much upset about things. Content is about mental attitude. So when you are content, learning to be content is learning to actually reduce the defilements. It may not be obvious that's actually what is going on here. So perhaps you think that this is only for monastics, because it says at the beginning, you're content with your robes and with alms food. It sounds like this is concerned for monks and nuns. But actually it's true in lay life as well, right? There's many different ways of living lay life. You can be content with what you have. You can be content with your partner, content with your job, content with your possessions, content with the way that your life is. Or you can be full of craving, full of desires, wanting things to be different. These are different. These are just as applicable in lay life as it is in monastic life. And of course, that idea of contentment, it means that you are happy where you are. Okay, if you get more, that's fine. If you get a little bit less, you're not so concerned. But essentially, you are content with what you have. There's a beautiful peace that comes with that contentment, right? This is why, of course, this is such an important step here again on the preliminary path towards deep meditation practice. It's very beautiful to be content. If you are content with the way things are, if you're not really, arguing with the world, or you're not kind of trying to get something else, there's kind of a beautiful mindset, a sense of peace, being at peace with the world. That's what contentment often is like. That's actually a very nice thing in its own right. So, and of course the way it is described here, and described very beautifully, it is just like a bird flying with its wings as its only burden, right? So the bhikkhu, wherever you go, all we have is the robes to protect your body and alms food to maintain your stomach. It's like the monk I mentioned before, he carries his little bag with him and he goes off, that's all he ever has, nothing else. And you're free, just like the bird which has the wings as its only burden. So what do you think about that? Wings as your only burden. Does that sound like a big burden? To have your wings as your only burden? What does that mean? What do you think it means? The wings as your only burden. Does it mean that it has a burden, or does it mean it has no burden? What does that mean? I think what it means is that, well, basically it means that there's not much burden left, right? If the wings is the only burden, it's not too bad. It's pretty good. But it's like, maybe there's a little bit of burden, right? You still have to carry these wings with you. Not always kind of nice. It's like, in the same way, if you're a monk, okay, it's not much if you only have an alms bowl and your robes, but it's still a little bit. You still have to carry these things, right? So it's like you're on the way towards unburdening yourself. You have this little bit of burden, and you have to use this little bit of burden. It's like you're using a burden to get rid of a bigger burden. This way, you're gradually getting rid of all burdens. I think this is probably part of the point of this symbol. And then, when you are able to be content in this way, you find your desires are decreasing, and you start to become very content, and your mental virtue is now increasing. You're working on your mind. And when you have this noble aggregate of virtue, you experience within yourself the bliss that is blameless, right? This beautiful idea that just by being moral, just by living a good life, you already have a happiness inside. This is called the Anavajja Sukha in Pali. Sukha is happiness. Anavajja means where you have there's nothing to be blamed. When you look inside of yourself, you know that you have a degree of purity inside of yourself. There's something very nice about that, because very often in the world, other people may blame us, other people may say bad things about us, but there is a freedom that comes from being kind and being a good person. And part of that freedom is the ability not to care what other people think, because you know, when you look inside of yourself, that you have done what is right. You couldn't do any better. If other people judge you for doing what is right, it's not your problem, it's their problem. Right? So there's liberation there, liberation from having to care, having to bother the stupid opinions of so many people around in the world. People are always going to blame us. Even when we are blameless, it's always going to happen. It happened to the Buddha. The Buddha was blamed for all kind of bad things in his life. It happens to anyone regardless of pure you are. So blame is not the issue. What is the issue is whether we are pure or not. There's a nice passage in the introduction to the Brahmajala Sutta, famous Brahmajala Sutta, the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya. So this is a sutta that starts off with the Buddha, I think, going from one city to another one. And behind the Buddha and behind the Sangha, there's a couple of Brahmins walking behind them. And one of these Brahmins is praising the Sangha. Oh, the Sangha and the Buddha, everything is so wonderful and so great, right? And the other Brahmin is saying, you don't have anything to do with those scallywags, they're really bad people, and they're doing this bad, that bad, all those kind of things. And then the Brahmins go to the Buddha and say, this is what's happening here. And the Buddha said, well, the way you should deal with praise and blame is always just to ask yourself, is it true? And if the blame is true, then maybe you can take it seriously, and maybe you should change your conduct. If the blame is false, don't have to worry about it, just put it to one side. Praise, the same thing. If the praise is true, okay, then it's fine. It's just according to truth. But if the praise is over the top and the praise isn't really true, we should put that just to one side as well. Otherwise, we get attached to the praise, and the ego kind of grows when there's absolutely no basis for the ego to grow. So anyway, you don't want to have too much ego, right? It kind of gets in the way of all good things in life. So very beautiful advice, very pragmatic here. Always the Buddha very pragmatic. You just ask yourself the simple question, is it true? And if it isn't true, just drop it, right? So, and then when you do that, and you find that you have your virtue is well established inside of yourself, you feel a sense of blamelessness because you know that you're blameless. And this is a kind of reflection. The Buddha talks about the sila nusati. I'm sure you heard about the sila nusati, the recollection of character, or recollection of virtue in your life. And this is what this is. You know that you're blameless, so you feel happy. You're recollecting your own virtue. And recollection of virtue, recollection of your own good character, is not something that you have to do and use not of force. You don't have to sit down and kind of think of all the good things, think really hard of all the good things you've been doing. If you have to try too hard, it means you're not really there yet. You haven't purified yourself enough. Always, if you have to try too hard, it's unpleasant in meditation. Meditation should be very peaceful. And really, the sila nusati should just be just sitting back, you're just becoming peaceful, and you just allow a good memory to arise from the past. Then you feel happiness about yourself because you know you've been doing the right thing. There's a slight movement of the mind which guides in the right direction, but not force, not really trying too hard with these things. So that is the sila nusati. And this is what is happening here, the sila nusati. You feel happiness simply because there's nothing bad to remember. And that is a type of happiness, because you don't have the suffering of thinking about the bad things. That's one thing. And the other side of the coin is you feel happiness because of the good things that you have done. And the two things together are the bliss of blamelessness. So now you can see that at this point you're really starting on the path of meditation, because you're experiencing the sort of states, the sort of happiness inside it, which actually makes meditation possible. Okay, so that is contentment. So please, I recommend you try to be content in life, be content with what you have, and you'll find so much more happiness on that basis. Now, we are moving even deeper into the development of the mind, and this next section here is called the Indriya Samvara Sila, the morality of the virtue that has to do with the restraint of the senses. And this is quite important, and I want to spend quite a bit of time on this particular section. And after I finish this section, I want to talk about a number of other suttas which kind of elucidate this, which explain what is actually going on in this particular passage. So let's see what the Buddha has to say about Indriya Samvara, the restraint of the senses. So, okay, on seeing a form with the eye, he does not grasp at its signs and features. Since if you left the I faculty unguarded, evil, unwholesome states of covetousness and grief might invade him. He practices the way of its restraint. He guards the I faculty. He undertakes the restraint of the I faculty. So, when you read that, it sounds, it's not exactly clear, is it, exactly what is going on? Okay, you restrain the I faculty. What does it really mean to restrain the I faculty? These are the kind of questions that come up when you read this passage. At least it took me a number of years, but after a while I started wondering, what does this actually mean? So what is going on here is that you are seeing things, right? You're seeing a form with the eye. There's always things coming into the range of the eye, we always see things. And the two things that we see, it says here, is signs and the features. And this is a bit obscure. What it basically means is that you see an object, or you see a thing. So you see a person, and then you can see the aspect of that person. So either you see the whole object, or you see an aspect of the object. That's all it really means. It doesn't really add all that much to this thing. So you see the object or the aspect of the object. And grasping onto that, what does it mean that you grasp onto that? What it means is that your attention gets hooked, right? Your attention is hooked on that object. So, you see an attractive person, maybe of the opposite gender, and then your eyes kind of get hooked on that person, right? And you kind of sticks on that person, because there's a sense of something there which is attractive or beautiful. Or you see something which is unpleasant, and it sticks in your mind afterwards. You see something very terrible, and it sticks in your mind afterwards. That's also a kind of grasping, right? So this is what is meant by grasping here. Your attention gets hooked. You're not able to just kind of go with the flow anymore, but you get stuck on that thing here. This is the opposite of what I was trying to do in meditation before. Remember, part of the meditation practice, you're just able to have a passive sense of awareness. You just hear, right? You don't allow yourself to get hooked by anything. Whatever arises, whatever sound you hear, the sound just passes through you. Whatever is going on, there's no problem there whatsoever. You don't get upset when somebody makes a sound. You don't get, nothing really bothers you. And this is the exact opposite of what is happening here. So in a sense, you are learning a type of sense restraint when you're learning the passive awareness of things happening. So this is what it means. So you don't grasp onto anything in life, anything you see, and afterwards also with the other senses. You just allow things, you go with the flow, as it said there. That means your mindfulness is always tends to be established. And the reason why we do that, of course, and this is becoming clear now, right? Grasping onto things means that you're hooked by the object. But what happens when you get hooked by the object? What does that mean then? Hooked by the object means you're going to have desire or aversion arising by that object, right? If there's something beautiful, you think, wow, I could, that Ferrari is very nice, I could do with a Ferrari like that. Or that is a terrible sight to see some sewage or something like that, and you kind of get turned off because of that. So you get hooked, and when you get hooked, desire arises or aversion arises. It is here. It is translated as evil, unwholesome states. Really, bad is better. Bad, unwholesome qualities. States just means qualities of the mind, types of mind, mind moments, or mind states that arise. The qualities of the mind, covetousness and grief. I think it's a terrible translation. I don't know what they were thinking when they translated it like this. It really is. Grief is like sadness when you lose someone, right? Oh no, my family member has died. This is just about what happens when you see something unpleasant. It's not, you don't feel grief. What you feel is kind of displeasure, or you feel perhaps a bit of aversion, or you feel dislike, right? It shows you how some of the translation might be, anyway, this is just my opinion. In my opinion, this is really gone really wrong when you translate it as grief. And covetousness is not too bad, but it really means like desire, right? Desire or liking for something. That is actually what it really means. So you stop desire and aversion. You stop like and dislike from invading your mind. That's essentially what it comes down to. So that is what it means to practice restraint, to avoid this particular thing from happening. So you guard the eye faculty, right? The guarding, what does that mean? It means you're mindful, right? You're aware. Guarding is always mindfulness. You're aware of what is happening. You guard the eye faculty. So guarding always begins with mindfulness. And then, when you guard the eye faculty, you're able to catch yourself. You can see that now you're about to slide into desire, you're about to slide into aversion, so you catch yourself in time. And then you have a strategy to move away. And that is what the restraint part is. And that is, of course, a very interesting part, right? This idea of a strategy to be able to move away when you see that desire and aversion is about to arise. And this is really the hard part about sense restraint. The ability to move away when you see that desire and aversion is about to arise. This is the hard part. And for the vast majority of people in the world, even if they see that desire is about to arise, the desire is great. Who cares about desire? It's a wonderful thing. It often feels like that, right? What's wrong with desire? It just means that you're enjoying yourself. You're having a good time. When you see good food, of course you have desire, and then you enjoy the good food. No problem, right? Well, it's not quite as simple as that. This is how most people think. So we have to learn strategies to counteract that. Learn strategies to look at the world in a new way. And that is really what restraint is about. When you hear the word restraint, this is the way I used to think about it. It sounds like you're going to have to use your willpower. Right? I'm going to hold back. I'm going to keep my eyes away from this. I'm going to keep my nose away from that nice smelling food or whatever. I'm going to kind of control my mind using willpower. Because the word restraint in English, we often have the idea of restraining someone, like physically restraining, means holding them back, right? You have a restraining order in law against someone. It means that they are held back from being able to approach you. But this is only one aspect. It's a very weak aspect of what is going on here. Much more important for restraint is the idea of wisdom, of understanding the problems that arise. And when you understand the problems, the restraint happens as a matter of course. You don't have to force yourself, because you understand that this is going to be painful. You understand this is going to be suffering. If I wanted to destroy my happiness, then I go into this area of aversion and desire. If I want to be happy, I don't go into that area. And this is what we need to understand. And once you understand this, then sense restraint actually starts to become possible. Okay, so let us do a little bit of more meditation before we move on with more this particular topic. this idea of sense restraint. And just saying the importance of doing the sense restraint in the right way, doing it with wisdom, and doing it in a way whereby we don't use too much force, because force is often very unpleasant, and it makes you tired, and it makes the whole practice uncomfortable. But if we use it with wisdom, we actually have the ability to overcome these things without tiring the mind out, without feeling like we're using too much force. And not only that, this is only part of it, but even more important is that when you use wisdom, it's actually much more powerful in overcoming these kind of things than using force. If you use force, often what we do is like push these things into a corner of your mind, and very easily they come back up again because they haven't really been eliminated altogether. But if you use wisdom, we can actually overcome these defilements completely, and that is why wisdom is so much more powerful than using force. Now, of these two things, of course, the biggest problem here is basically the negative mind states. When you get aversion or you get anger or whatever, that is the biggest problem. So if you're going to have to deal with either desire or aversion, it's more important to deal with the anger and the ill will, particularly in lay life. That is really where the biggest problems arise. So, how do you do that then? What do I mean when I say using wisdom rather than willpower? What does it actually mean by that? And what I mean, and this you can find this in another sutta which is not included here, in the Majjhima Nikaya 19, called the two kinds of thoughts. And there the Buddha talks about his own experience before his own awakening and how he practiced his own life. And there he says specifically how to overcome the negative states of mind. And what he says is that you have to reflect basically on the danger of these things. The danger means the suffering inherent in these kind of things, right? And when you understand the suffering that arises in negative mind states, then it's natural that the mind will go away and move towards something else. So what you need to understand, and this is some of the things I was just talking about before, when you have desire and ill will, the mind is no longer in the present moment, right? The mind is distracted into this thing, into the past, into the future, and you're actually taken away from this beautiful state of being present here and now, which is called mindfulness. So that is the first thing. It is actually irritation in the mind. Desire and will is something unpleasant in the mind. So you have to try to see that. And if you see that, that is already enough to kind of move you slightly in the right direction. It makes it easier to let go of these things when they actually start to arise. It's agata. It's like an impact on the mind which actually is unpleasant. So seeing that already helps. So that is, this is the sort of thing that we mean by seeing the danger in this thing. Another thing which is very important, understanding the danger in ill will, particularly, but also desire to some extent, is that eventually, these are like forces in the mind that eventually lead you to do stupid things, right? When you're angry, that's when we're likely to say something silly. That's when we're angry to act in a stupid way. When desire is very strong, that's also often when we actually do things that we shouldn't be doing. So reflect on that, and reflect, yes, of course, yes, we can restrain ourselves to some extent, but the problem is that restraint is hard, and the mind, there will be a tendency for letting go of that, and then kind of doing what is bad as a consequence of those bad states. That is a natural habit, a natural tendency of the mind. And eventually you will succumb and you will actually do these things even though it is against your better judgment. So remember, it leads to all these problems in the long run, right? Whereby you actually end up doing bad things because of these mind states. It is unpleasant here and now. It leads away from nibbana, right? It leads to more suffering. It leads to entanglement in samsara. It leads to more rebirth in the future. It leads to all these kind of issues. It leads away from wisdom. It leads to the cessation of wisdom, says the Buddha. Whenever you're angry, whenever you have lots of desire in the mind, wisdom has been destroyed at that particular point. So what do you think? Is that bad or is that good? It's pretty bad, isn't it? It's pretty bad. Everybody wants to be wise, right? Isn't it good to be wise? Wisdom means understanding the world as it actually is. It means being able to react in a wise way. It means having the ability to help others because you have wisdom. If you destroy wisdom, you kind of lose anything which is really worthwhile in life. Everybody with any kind of sense wants to be wiser because it is what helps us to have a good life. Desire and ill will destroys that wisdom. And just reflect a little bit for yourself, and I'm sure you'll be able to see that that is true. Otherwise, I can go into more detail how that is the case. So these are using wisdom to be able to understand why we need to hold back from these things. And when you remember that, when you remember the danger in these things, it's actually much easier to kind of to move away. You don't have an anger arising. You don't have an ill will arising, which otherwise would arise. Power of wisdom. Ajahn Brahm calls it wisdom power. I'm sure you've heard about Ajahn Brahm, wisdom power, right? And it's a beautiful concept. And it's very nice when you see that the Buddha is basically explaining the same thing in the sutras. I always find that very encouraging when kind of your teacher and Ajahn Brahm is certainly my teacher. When my teacher says one thing, the Buddha says the same, I think, okay, good sign. That's always a good thing. Yeah. So it makes me gives you more confidence in what is going on there. So this is what is happening here. So let me just finish the rest of this paragraph. On hearing a sound with the ear, on smelling an odor with the nose, on tasting a flavor with the tongue, on touching a tangible with the body, and on cognizing a mind object with the mind. He does not grasp at the object and its details, since if he left the mind unguarded, bad, unwholesome qualities of desire and aversion would invade his mind. Because of that, he practices the way of its restraint. He uses wisdom power. He guards the mind faculty with mindfulness. And then he uses the wisdom power to avoid these states from arising. Possessed of this noble restraint of the faculties, he experiences within himself a bliss that is unsullied. So, with all the faculties, it's the same. Even with the mind, right? Sometimes you start fantasizing about something. Sometimes you remember something from the past that makes you upset and angry. So even the mind is the same problem as the other faculties. And we use the same ideas to try to avoid getting into these negative things. And when you do that, you have the bliss, sukha, that is unsullied. Abhyaseka sukha is called in the Pali. And what that means is that it's not sullied by these bad states of mind. Previously, we already had the bliss of a virtue, right? Anabhajja sukha. Now you have the bliss that is not sullied. Because as long as you have these bad states in the mind, it's almost like your virtue isn't pure enough yet. It's like it is stained in a certain way. It has these spots on it which doesn't make it pure. So it's the now you get the unsullied bliss, where you have very few defilements left in the mind, and then that really starts to bite. And this kind of happiness, again, is a happiness that leads towards samadhi, leads towards mindfulness, leads towards meditation becoming possible there. So, good. So this is a restraint of the faculties. Now, to enable us to actually restrain ourselves in this way, to enable us to overcome ill will and to overcome resentment and overcome the negative states of the mind, first of all, you understand that it's dangerous. But also what you need is very useful, is to have the tools, the mental tools that enable you not to fall into the traps of anger and ill will. So the next thing I want to do is I want to focus a bit more on the practical tools of the trade, right? That's what we're doing with it. Tools of the trade, and make it possible for us to overcome these things. You see the danger, then you apply those tools. So what I want to do, I want to take a break from this particular sutta, and I want to move on to some other suttas. I will come back to this sutta later on. But before we go into the more profound states, let's have a look at some of these tools that we can use to help us overcome the problems. And okay. program to make sure I don't... Okay, we'll see what happens. The program is much shorter than the number of sutras, so we might be in trouble here. See how things go. Okay, this is one of my favorite sutras for how to overcome anger in the Pali Canon. It's quite a simple sutra, but sometimes the simple stuff is very beautiful. Sometimes the simple stuff is great, precisely because it's simple. It means it's easy to understand, it's easy to understand, it's easy to apply, right? This is really what this is about. We want to be able to apply these teachings. So if something is easy to understand, I always find that very powerful. This sutra is called Removing of Resentment. It's the one which comes straight after the first one. And so let's have a look what this says. I'll try to do this in not take too long on this particular one. So there the Venerable Sariputta addressed the bhikkhus. Friend the bhikkhus. Friend those bhikkhus replied. The Venerable Sariputta said this. Friends, there are these 5 ways of removing resentment or anger, if you like, or ill will, by which a bhikkhu or anyone else should entirely remove resentment when it has arisen toward anyone. What? 5. Here a person's bodily behavior is impure, but his verbal behavior is pure. One should remove resentment towards such a person. A person's verbal behavior is impure, but his bodily behavior is pure. One should also remove resentment towards such a person. A person's bodily behavior and verbal behavior are impure, but from time to time he gains an opening of the mind, the acidity of the mind. One should also remove resentment towards such a person. A person's bodily behavior and verbal behavior are impure, and he does not gain an opening of the mind, the acidity of the mind from time to time. One should also remove resentment towards such a person. A person's bodily behavior and verbal behavior are impure, and from time to time he gains an opening of the mind, the acidity of the mind. One should also remove resentment towards such a person. So 5 kinds of people, right? And one should remove resentment towards every one of those 5. So the point here is that these 5 categories, they are all embracing. All kind of people are included in these categories, from the worst kind of dodgy character to the best kind of saint. Everyone is in there somehow. So what that means is that we shouldn't have resentment towards anyone, right? That's basically what it means. And that's what it comes down to. So that is the summary of the sutta. The suttas are often structured in this way. You have a summary first, then you have the main body afterwards. So let's look now in more detail at each one of these. So how, friends, should resentment be removed toward a person whose bodily behavior is impure, but whose verbal behavior is pure? Suppose a rag-robed bhikkhu sees a rag by the roadside. He would press it down with his left foot and spread it out with his right foot, tear off an intact section and take it away with him. So too, when a person's bodily behavior is impure, but his verbal behavior, is impure, but his verbal behavior is pure, on that occasion, one should not attend to the impurity of his bodily behavior, but should instead attend to the purity of his verbal behavior. In this way, resentment toward that person should be removed. It's a very powerful advice there on how to abandon anger, right? You learn how to look at people, you learn how to focus on the good aspect of someone else. People are often made up of good and bad sides, right? This here uses the idea that you have impurity of the body with purity of speech. But sometimes it isn't that simple. Sometimes there's a certain aspect of a person that is pure and other aspect that is impure. I think the idea of using speech and bodily behavior here is just as an example. So essentially, we're all made up of a mixture of impurity, pure things and pure things. And it's this ability to focus in on the good aspects of a person that is the point here. And this is something you can train at. Sometimes you think that, well, you've got to see the world for what it actually is. But there is no such thing as seeing the world for the way it actually is. It isn't possible to see a person in an entirely neutral way and say, these are the bad things, these are the good things. The world isn't like that. If you take two different people, they will say two very different things about the same person, right? If you ask one person, oh, this person is great, they're really good. You ask another, say, oh, exactly the same person, this person is bad. And the point is that we are all kind of conditioned into our views and our perceptions of other people. There is no such thing as absolutely pure and correct perception of anyone. So what that means is that we can train the way we look at other people, and we can learn to see the good things, and we can learn not to see the bad aspects of the person. And this is a training, and to be able to do that, what you have to do is actually to deliberately think of the good aspects of someone else, and then develop that in the mind, and see those good aspects. That's what we really have to do. And in particular, if there are people in your life that you find are very hard to focus on in this way, that is where you need to train specifically, right? We all have our kind of people that we find difficult in life. It's always like that. So those are the people you focus on, and then you learn to see those people in a new way. And the bad qualities, you learn to forgive. You learn to let go of negative things, because you know that nobody really wants to be bad. Nobody wants to have negative qualities. I was talking about this yesterday during the talk. Remember that we are not conditioned beings, right? We are caused to be who we are now. All kind of conditioning in the past. Past lives perhaps, earlier in this life, through our schooling, through our parents, through all these things that happen to us. We are conditioned into what we are now. And we are all the same. And in Buddhism, because we have the idea that there is no self, a self is like, if there was a self, it would be like you have this entity inside of you, this solidity, this thing which can always guide you to go in the right way, because it's solid, it never wavers. But because there isn't that solidity inside, because there isn't this thing inside of you which can always direct you in the right way, it means that you are always caused, you're conditioned into everything. You are drifting on the ocean like a ship without a rudder. Now the wind comes from the east, you go to the west. Now the wind comes from the west, you go to the east. It's like we're drifting around depending on the conditions that actually are exerting the influence on us at any particular time. And this is the problem in life, right? To think about that. Remember that the people around you, usually people want to be kind. Because we know, I think we all know intuitively that kindness is good. We know that, we intuitively know that kindness leads to happiness. I mean, I think most people know that. Even people who are not Buddhist, even people who are not living a spiritual life, there's something inside of it that tells us that goodness and kindness leads to happiness. It's like an intuition. We really know that. So if someone isn't kind, it isn't usually because they don't want to be kind. It's because they're not able to be kind, right? They know, their better judgment says, I want to be kind, but they can't, because the conditioning is so strong. Now what does that make you feel like when you know that somebody, they really want to be kind, but they're not able to because the conditioning is so strong? What is the feeling that arises? A sense of compassion, isn't it? A sense of feeling sympathy for that person. They actually would like to be kind, but they can't do it. Then you can turn around your understanding of people, and you can forgive those negative qualities in someone else, because you understand that they are a victim of their own conditioning, just like we also are a victim of our own conditioning. The fact that you're a victim doesn't mean that you blame someone else, because it's nobody else's fault. It's just conditioning, basically. And then you can forgive that, and you can look at the positive sides, and you can think, wow, what a miracle it is that they have any good qualities at all, right? Wow, isn't it wonderful that there are people in this world with so many good qualities? And then you can rejoice in the goodness, and you can forgive the bad qualities. But in particular, it is about here having that ability to just focus on the good qualities. See the good qualities, remember those, and then forget about the bad ones, because you don't really know whether they really are bad qualities. You don't even know whether it is just a conditioning from the past. You don't know what is going on. So put them to one side and just focus on the good things. This is what this is about. Place your attention there. This is something you can learn to do with anyone in this world. It's a very powerful technique, and of course the reason why it is mentioned here specifically is precisely because it is a powerful technique, one of the most powerful techniques in overcoming anger with other people. So for that reason, very, very useful. So apply yourself in this way. And it says here, it's just like a rag-road bhikkhu sees a rag by the roadside. You tear off the bad stuff and you keep the good part, and then you make a rag robe out of this. I used to have a really nice rag robe before, but unfortunately I lost that many years ago. It became too raggy after one. But it's quite nice to wear a rag robe actually. It feels quite good. It feels like kind of going back to the roots of what Buddhism really was about in the early days. So it's quite a nice thing to do. Anyway, I'm not going to talk too much more about that because time is at the premium, as I said. So, let's go on to the second type of person, and this is more of the same, really. And it goes like this. How, friends, should resentment be removed toward the person whose verbal behavior is impure, but whose bodily behavior is pure? Suppose there is a pond covered with algae and water plants. A man might arrive afflicted and oppressed by the heat, weary, thirsty, and parched. He would plunge into the pond, sweep away the algae and water plants with his hand, drink from his cupped hands, and then leave them. So too, when a person's verbal behavior is impure, but his bodily behavior is pure, on that occasion one should not attend to the purity of his verbal behavior, but should instead attend to the purity of his bodily behavior. In this way, resentment toward that person should be removed. So this again is the same idea as before, right? You push aside, you sweep aside the algae, you sweep aside the bad qualities. You don't really know where the bad qualities, but you tend to think so. You sweep that aside, and then you drink from the good qualities, right? You drink from the pure, clean water. It's like drinking. It's just like they say that having a mind of ill will or a mind of desire, it's like being afflicted. You are hot, you are heated. So you're drinking from the cool water, you're drinking from the beautiful qualities of the person to allay the heat of anger or the ill will or negativity. You're seeing the good things in this person. And again, remember, this is something you can develop in your life. If there are particular persons that are particularly difficult, you can use this method on that person specifically to overcome any problems that you have there. Okay, let us move on to the third type of person. How, friends, should resentment or anger be removed towards a person whose bodily and verbal behavior are impure, but who from time to time gains an opening of the mind, the acidity of the mind? Suppose there is a little water in a puddle. Then a person might arrive afflicted and oppressed by the heat, weary, thirsty, and parched. He would think there is this little water in the puddle. If I try to drink it with my cupped hands or a vessel, I will stir it up, disturb it, and make it undrinkable. Let me get down on all fours, suck it up like a cow, and depart. He then gets down on all fours and sucks the water up like a cow, and departs. So too, when a person's bodily behavior and verbal behavior are impure, but from time to time against an opening of the mind, facility of the mind, on that occasion one should not attend to the purity of the bodily or verbal behavior, but should instead attend to the opening of the mind, the facility of mind he gains from time to time. In this way, resentment toward that person should be removed. right? So this is the person who has just a little bit of good qualities, lots of bad ones, but a few good ones are still there. And what the Buddha is saying here, or Sariputta is saying, it is possible, even if you have just a little bit of good qualities, to focus in on those narrowly, kind of not. If you look a little bit to the left, a little bit to the right, you see the bad stuff. So you have to kind of focus down very narrowly to just see the good qualities, right? And this is, again, a wonderful exercise in learning how to perceive and look at things in the world, and looking at people in the world. And the example here is about someone who gains placidity of the mind, opening of the mind from time to time. What this means is somebody who becomes peaceful every now and again. Somebody who's able to not have any defilements and become peaceful. And you can see that in people when they have that, right? Someone looks peaceful, and you know they have that ability to become peaceful. And then you think about that, wow, isn't that beautiful? Look at that person being peaceful. Even though they are often a scallywag otherwise, still they can get some peace and peace of mind. What a wonderful thing that is. And you focus on that beautiful aspect, and then that allays all the problem. But you have to be very careful. You have to get down like a cow, not to disturb it, right? And suck the water down like a cow. It's a nice image there in this particular sutta. Okay, next one. Now this next one is very interesting because this is slightly different. So far we have looked at people who have good qualities. The next one is the person who cannot see anything good in them, right? Sometimes there are people like that. You have to remember here that this is not about whether the person actually has any good qualities or bad qualities. It's about our perception, right? What we see. Is it possible to really know whether the person has good or bad qualities? All we know is our own attitude towards it, our own perception. So it's our own perception that we really are talking about here. So this is the case where you cannot see anything good. So all you can see is bad stuff. So what do you think, just before you start, what do you think should be done if someone is completely bad? And the answer, of course, is sort of have compassion, right? So previously we're focusing on metta, we're focusing on seeing the good in it. That's what metta is. If there's nothing good to be seen, then you have to move on to compassion. And this is what this is about. So one of the interesting principles here, and maybe I should talk about this straight away before I move on to the sutta, is that the first three aspects are about metta. The next one here is about compassion. And it shows you, this is part of one of the structure that you see in the suttas all the time. Metta always comes first, and compassion comes afterwards. When you see the four Brahmali, the first Brahmali is always metta, the second one is compassion, the third one mudita, last one upekkha. So why is it that metta always comes first? It comes first here as well. What is the reason for that? And the reason for that, it doesn't actually say in the sutta, this is just my idea, but it seems reasonable enough to me, is that metta, there is no danger with metta. Seeing the beautiful aspect of someone else is never dangerous. It always makes you happy at the end of the day. You can't really go too wrong with seeing the beauty in someone else. However, when you focus on compassion, what you are really focusing on is the suffering of someone else, right? You're focusing on the suffering in the world. And if you focus on suffering in the wrong way, it can make you feel sad perhaps, or it can make you feel a bit negative, make you feel, oh, the world is such a terrible place, everyone is suffering. And instead of giving you happiness, it kind of brings you down. So, in a sense, it's safer to look at metta. Metta is better, it's more safe than looking at using compassion. Compassion takes more wisdom than metta. Metta, all it takes is seeing the good qualities, and that's good enough. Compassion takes a bit of wisdom on top of that. So, please do metta practice. That's what I'm saying here. Please practice metta. You can't go wrong with metta, right? Metta always leads to feeling good afterwards. It always leads to beautiful things. You cannot really go too wrong with doing metta. And this is what this sutta is saying as well. First of all, try metta. If metta doesn't work, then if everything is so bad about this person, then do compassion as a kind of final way out, because you're not really able to find an opening for the metta in this particular case. So again, there's a hierarchy, right? Metta, compassion, and mudita. Okay. So how does this work? How do we have compassion towards this next person? How, friend, should the resentment be removed toward the person whose bodily and verbal behavior are impure, and who does not gain an opening of the mind, placidity of mind from time to time? Suppose a sick, afflicted, gravely ill person was travelling along the highway, and the last village behind him and the next village ahead of him were both far away. He would not obtain suitable food and medicine or a qualified attendant. He would not get to meet the leader of the village district. Another man travelling along the highway might see him, arouse sheer compassion, sympathy and tender concern for him, thinking, "Oh, may this man obtain suitable food, suitable medicine, and a qualified attendant. May he get to meet the leader of the village district." For what reason? So that this man does not encounter calamity and disaster right here. So too, when a person's bodily and verbal behavior are impure, and he does not gain from time to time an opening of the mind, placidity of the mind, on that occasion one should arouse sheer compassion, sympathy, and tender concern for him, thinking, "Oh, may this venerable one abandon bodily behavior and develop good bodily behavior, abandon verbal misbehavior and develop good verbal behavior. May he abandon mental misbehavior and develop good mental behavior." For what reason? So that with the breakup of the body after death, he will not be reborn in the plane of misery, in a bad destination in the lower world in hell. In this way, resentment toward that person should be removed. Right? So if someone is really that bad, or everything about them is wrong, and we cannot see anything good about them, it means that they are, without knowing it, without understanding it, they are creating an enormous pile of suffering for themselves. That's what they are doing. And this is what you're understanding here. You're seeing the suffering that this person is creating for themselves without understanding it. And that is how you change your perception. And then you have compassion. It's like a sick person, right? They're ill, they're sick. How do you feel when you see somebody very sick who doesn't have a proper attendant? How do you feel about that? If someone is very, very sick, it's not the fault of their own, right? They're really out of it. There's nothing they can do. And this is what happens sometimes in life. When you see someone like that, you want to help them. You want to aid them because you have compassion for them. And this is exactly how we understand someone with very bad qualities. Just like someone who is sick. It is no fault of their own, because they don't understand, because they're deluded, because they haven't seen the right teachings or whatever. Because of that, you have a sense of compassion towards this person. So it's like a sick person. What a beautiful thought that is. And then, of course, it becomes possible to have compassion, even for the worst kind of dodgy characters and criminals or whatever it is. Like Ajahn says, even for the Adolf Hitlers of the world. There is, unfortunately, a few Adolf Hitlers around sometimes. But even for the Adolf Hitlers of the world, we can have a sense of compassion, because they don't really understand, right? They're deluded. Something is going wrong there. And then there is no one in the whole world who cannot forgive and who cannot have compassion towards it. It's nice, isn't it? And then, of course, you can keep a pure mind. There's no reason to get angry anymore. There's no reason to get upset. All you have is purity inside, compassion and metta. And this is how these contemplations are supposed to work. So here are the tools. The Buddha, the Venerable Sariputta, is saying, handle the tools in the plate. Now you just have to use them, you have to apply them in your own life. And when you do that, it's guaranteed that they will work. You just have to apply yourself again and again and again. And gradually, you will have less and less anger and resentment. So, we have now, I'm just following life planning schedule here. 2:14 it says here. 2:41 it says over here, so we have to stop there. So But I will finish this sutta after the break, and then we'll have Q&A will just be shortened down by a few minutes. But I think that's okay. I think we need to finish the sutta first of all. So I'll see you back in 20 minutes. We'll have a short break.
They got us wrong.